Hey neighbor, welcome back to ARTV. My name is John and it's time for a review of the second studio album, Heartbreak Weather, by the Irish singer-songwriter, former One Direction member, Niall Horan. Before I even advance with any discussion of the album to clear the elephant out of the room, regardless of what I think about his music, I think Niall is like a super likable person. He seems very down to earth, very genuine, humble even at times for somebody who has reached the status that he's been at. And now with this new record coming out of Flickr, a record that certainly was not in my top 10, 25, or even top 200 albums for the year that released, we move into a record, Heartbreak Weather, that had a great lead single. So yes, I had some expectations for this. It wasn't necessarily number one on my albums to check out for the week that it dropped, but still, Nice to Meet Ya is fantastic. It's a slice of Britpop, a little bit of rock and alternative in there, just some grit to it, and I was really hoping to see more of that on the album. Heartbreak Weather, album number 2. He's continuing on just as Harry Styles, his former bandmate, did. And unlike Harry, who seems to consistently be pushing something out, I hate to endlessly compare just because they were in the same band, but Niall is doing the second best solo career thing, but it's still rather meandering. It just wanders on, and Heartbreak Weather is a step above his last record, Flickr, but it's no giant leap forward. Whereas his first album was a little bit more folky, I wouldn't say that he's totally strayed from that path, but this record has a lot of the muted guitar progressions, just so many muted chords, and it just feels so formulaic and safe. It's not necessarily awful, and I don't think that there's necessarily any egregious songs on the LP, but he doesn't really pack any punches like he did with Nice to Meet Ya. There's catchy moments, and I like the title track here. It starts off the album, it brings some energy, some tempo, the music video is funny, and again, I think a lot of that dates back to him being a very likable human being. But it doesn't translate to an engaging record overall. Niall didn't totally abandon the folk roots. You can hear that on a decent amount of tracks here, and perhaps part of the problem has to do with maybe it could have been trimmed down just a bit. I understand the need for a little bit of a longer project, especially when fans are always clamoring for more. It's 14 tracks on the standard album, and most of them do just kind of breeze by, not leaving too much of an impact. If it's something that you just want to throw on, maybe drive to, you're doing homework, you're doing something in the background and not necessarily wanting to focus on a record that you just want to outright love and hear every lyric on, then maybe you'll connect with this record in some way. I'm not saying that it's necessarily something to rush out and hear. There's tracks worth hearing, and there's definitely catchiness built into some of these hooks like No Judgement, but it feels like a slightly cheap version of that. I mean, some of these parts just feel like something that I've heard so many times. The bass on some of these tracks, New Angel, it kind of feels like a Foster the People track mixed with an amalgamation of other things that I've heard too many times over the years. My friend and fellow critic Spectrum Pulse and I were talking a little bit behind the scenes about Heartbreak Weather, and Mark compared him to Robbie Williams on Heartbreak Weather. And that comparison is definitely understandable. That's something that kind of went off like a light bulb in my head, but not necessarily a super positive one. I've never been huge on Robbie's music, and just like I've never been huge on Niall's, I have nothing against either artist. It's just something that kind of flatlines more often than not. They have the songs that pop out and stand out in the mix in a very clear way, and those I am all about throwing praise towards. Nice to Meet Ya, I will recommend to anyone. But outside of that, it's hard to get excited about a release that put its best foot forward so far in advance, and then everything in comparison just looks a little bit inferior. I will say that the songwriting feels stronger here. I like some of his collaborators like Tobias Jesso Jr. He worked with Florence and the Machine on several of their projects, and I appreciate the collaborations. The production, it's okay. It's nothing that's making the guitars or anything else in the mix really pop all that well, outside of, again, I hate to keep name checking it, Nice to Meet Ya. Of course, you know one song that I absolutely love on the LP, but outside of that, I've already mentioned the title track Heartbreak Weather. I also appreciate Bend the Rules to a degree. I like the lyrical aspect and angle there, and also the track Arms of a Stranger. It feels like Niall is getting a little bit more vulnerable, opening up. And it's not that he doesn't on the album, I just feel like there's so many stereotypical relationship songs about girls, and it doesn't do a ton for me. I appreciate the edge and the curve that he brought with Nice to Meet You. It felt a little bit more risque, I guess, for pop. And this album overall doesn't have that step outside of the box. It's something that feels very contained, not sanitized. It's likable enough, but the personality, it's not quite there. And I really hope that Niall can continue to build in some ways, because I see glimmers of light bleeding through the cracks of the record, but he still hasn't fully turned the knob up to 10. For me personally, this again is a little bit above Flicker. It's not a total reinvention of his sound, it's not a major step forward, but it also has improved on some fronts, and I do have to acknowledge that. So props, Niall. I hope that you can pull out something that feels a little bit more out of your element next time around without selling your soul. Me personally, I'm going to give this a 3 out of 5. Your thoughts are welcomed in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like on this review while you're here, and subscribe for the love of music. It's all just my opinion at the end of the day, and that was my 2 cents on Heartbreak Weather. If you want to see my thoughts on his first album, Flicker, then tap this card right here. If you want to see my top 100 favorite albums of the past decade, the 2010s, then tap this card here. I put a lot of work into that one. Other than that, you can find my Patreon, all of my socials, all the links that you see on screen here in the description down below, and I'll see you soon for more reviews and other music-themed content right here on ARTV.